他是当代最著名的思想家之一，他的20部著作被翻译成35种语言，在全球广泛发行。他为欧盟和世界多国提供政策咨询和建议。他的著作《第3次工业革命》获得了瞩目的成就。他关于后碳时代可持续发展经济模式的研究，获得了李克强总理及德国总理默克尔、法国总统奥朗德的肯定。他认为，可再生能源和互联网技术结合起来的革命将改变整个世界。
What do you think of the recent slowdown in China's economy?
This slowdown is global. The second industrial revolution, it's sunsetting, it's on life support.
Have you heard that China's Premier Li Keqiang is a fan of yours?
Yes, I have. I have to tell you, I was quite surprised.
In your opinion, what advantages does China have in the third industrial revolution?
You're a social market economy. That's important. You have the market, you have government. Each works with the other. It's important to have the government involved.
If it comes true, and this world doesn't need workers anymore, what do you think is the ultimate fate of humans?
They look back at their grandparents in the 20th century and say, oh, the poor people. My grandpa had to drive a truck all day long, back and forth and back and forth. That was his whole life. My grandma had to sit as a clerk in a store in a cash register taking credit cards all of her life. Because by that time, our children will live in a more automated world. Now, is it a utopia? Of course not.
You just said you have written 20 books. Which book would you say is your favorite?
That's like asking a parent, who's your favorite child?
网易财经专访社会思想家杰里米·里夫金，精彩内容即将呈现。
Welcome to NetEase Financial Channel. I know you have visited China many times. What's your impression of China?
My impression is this is becoming the ideal laboratory for the world. It's very exciting coming here. I've spent some time with the leadership here in Beijing and the government and business community, and also the academic community. And I think there's a sense of excitement and responsibility because China is now the leading economic power in the world. So I think China is embarking on a new journey to help usher in a more economically just society and a more ecological civilization in the 21st century.
Have you heard that China's Premier Li Keqiang is a fan of yours?
Yes, I have. I have to tell you, I was quite surprised. It was Christmas time, and I'm up there on my study looking at Google, and I see this, and I say to my wife, is this a joke? Someone's playing on me. And my wife came and looked at it, and I was so surprised that they put out his official biography, and he said he was a fan and had read my book, The Third Industrial Revolution, and it instructed the central government to begin moving on the central themes and ideas that I was putting forth. Now, you know, the Third Industrial Revolution is the formal plan of the EU. I helped develop that for the European Union, but I was so pleasantly surprised. It was just a great thing.
China's recent economic data shows a sign of weakness. What do you think of the recent slowdown in China's economy?
Yeah, let me explain this, and I go into this in great detail in the new book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society. This slowdown is global.
You said it's a kind of global slowdown, so that's why the Western economic entities are also in trouble now.
I think all the economies are in trouble because we're living off a 20th century communication, energy, and transport system that has no productivity left. Let me explain what I mean. All the great economic paradigm shifts in history share a common denominator, and that is, at a certain point in time, new communication technologies emerge to more efficiently manage economic activity, and they then converge with new forms of energy to more efficiently power economic activity, and they converge with new forms of transportation to more efficiently move economic activity. So when communication, energy, and transportation technologies congeal, they create what engineers call a general purpose technology platform, a completely new way to organize economic life. The first industrial revolution in the 19th century, the second industrial revolution in the 20th century. In the 19th century, communication, energy, and transport came together. We went to steam-powered printing and the telegraph. That communication revolution converged with cheap coal, powered by steam engines, for energy. Then that converged with a new transport system based on railroads and national rail systems. This changed the entire way of economic life for a century. We went from local markets to national markets, and we created a new governing institution called the nation state to oversee this economic territory. We created the modern stockholding corporation, and we created giant vertically integrated enterprises to organize economic life. In the 20th century, we had another communication, energy, transport shift, a second industrial revolution. Centralized electricity, the telephone, later radio and television, converged with new energy, oil, and powered by the internal combustion engine. And then new transport based on cars, buses, and trucks on national road systems. Now this gets to your point. The second industrial revolution took us through the 20th century. America led. Britain led the first industrial revolution in the 19th century. America led the second industrial revolution in the 20th century. And that second industrial revolution peaked in July 2008. That was the month that crude oil hit $147 a barrel on world markets. It was a record. And when that happened, purchasing power shut down and the economy collapsed. And the financial collapse was an aftershock. Basically, that second industrial revolution is all based on fossil fuels. Fertilizers, pesticides, construction materials, pharmaceuticals, packaging, synthetic power, transport, heat, and light. So this is important to understand the stagnation here. When oil prices started going over $100 a barrel in 2007, all the other prices for everything went up because everything's made out of fossil fuels. When oil hit $147 a barrel in July 2008, everything was so expensive, people stopped buying all over the world and the economy collapsed. So what's happening now to China is happening to the rest of the world. We are in an end game for the second industrial revolution. It's sunsetting. It's on life support. Every time we try to regrow the economy, all right, to regroup inventory, oil prices start to go up, other prices start to go up, and then around 115 a barrel for oil, purchasing power slows down and GDP starts to move back. So we're seeing these little spurts of GDP going up for a few years, then GDP slowing down, going up, slowing down. So there's no way now to break through this.
So we need the third industrial revolution to break the stalemate, right?
We need a third industrial revolution. And this is where I'm very hopeful about China, because as you know, the Chinese leadership has embraced the third industrial revolution. In 1905, we started the second industrial revolution, and America led it. We started at 3% aggregate energy efficiency. That means that when we put goods and services through the value chain at every step of conversion, about 3% of the energy went into the product or service, the rest was wasted. At around 1980, we got up to 13% aggregate energy efficiency, meaning about 13% of all the energy we used to convert goods and services went into the product, the rest was wasted. But that was a lot of productivity. But now that's stalled. We can't get any further than 13% aggregate energy efficiency, and therefore productivity is stalled.
Why is the productivity stopped?
Because we're living off an old communication energy transport system. What's interesting about the third industrial revolution is that it can take us from 13% energy efficiency to 40%. This is what we call extreme productivity. Let me explain. We are just beginning to see a new convergence of communication, energy, and transport, a third industrial revolution. And where we're seeing it is Germany and now China. Watch Germany, watch China. The communication internet that we all now use is morphing into a super internet of things. So the communication internet is beginning to converge with a digitalized renewable energy internet and a digitalized, automated, GPS-guided, and soon driverless transport and logistics internet.
2 years have passed since your book, The Third Industrial Revolution, swept the world. Can you tell me if there have been any recent developments of the third industrial revolution in the world?
Yeah, there have. I think the places to watch are Germany and China. Let me take Germany first. Let me back up for a moment. I mentioned this term zero marginal cost. This is crucial to understanding what's going to happen in Germany and China. In business, marginal cost is the cost of producing an additional unit of a good or service after you pay your fixed cost. Now, in the business community, we are always in search of new technologies that can increase our productivity, reduce our marginal costs so we can put out cheaper goods and services, win over consumers, and bring profits back to the investors. However, we never expected a technology revolution so extreme in its productivity that it could reduce marginal costs for some goods and services to near zero, making them essentially free and beyond the market. So what's happening is this Internet of Things platform that's starting to emerge in Germany and China offers the possibility of extreme productivity so that all of us can reduce marginal cost and produce our own goods and services for free. In Germany, since the chancellor's come into office, 27% of the electricity in Germany is now solar and wind. It's off carbon-based fuels. By 2020, approximately 35% of the energy powering the third biggest economy in the world will be solar and wind. Now, the fixed cost of solar and wind are going down, 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 just like computer chips. And I'll show you how old I am. Computers used to cost millions of dollars when I was a youngster. They're now $25 for a smartphone. So in Germany, the fixed cost of solar and wind are going down, but in China, they're going down too, because China is now leading in solar and wind. China is allowing the world to be able to have solar and wind technology because its industries are reducing the cost every year. But in Germany, once you pay for that solar panel and wind turbine, there are millions of people now doing this, the marginal cost of that energy is zero. The sun doesn't send a bill. There's no bill. You just have to keep the solar panel clean after you paid for it. The wind doesn't send a bill. It's free. Nor does geothermal heat. So Germany's heading toward near zero marginal cost energy. But now, watch China. This is what happened. I came here last September. I met with the Vice Premier, Wang Yang. I met with the Science and Tech Minister, Mr. Gong. I met with the Reform Commission, many, many government agencies. And I met with your business leaders. 11 weeks after I was here, the chairman of the National Electricity Grid of China announced an $82 billion four-year initial commitment by the National Grid of China to lay out a digitalized energy internet across China so that millions of Chinese people could produce their own solar and wind electricity locally and then send it back to an energy internet. This is an astounding historic turning point. And you know what? Not one journalist in the West reported on this. This is one of the great events in history. And the Chinese government says they want to take the energy internet and put it together with the communication internet and the transport and logistics internet that's digitalized to create an Internet of Things platform that can create extreme productivity across China. So it's a pretty big deal historically.
As we know, China has missed the first and second industrial revolution. In your opinion, what advantages does China have in the third industrial revolution?
That's a good question. I addressed that with the Vice Premier, Wang Yang, last time I was here and we chatted. I said, number one, you have a big asset. You are the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy. This landmass has more renewable energy than any other geographic space in the world. You have massive solar radiance. You have massive wind off your coastal regions. You have massive geothermal heat under the ground. You have massive biomass. You have huge amounts of hydro. The number two asset is you're a social market economy. That's important. You have the market, you have government. Each works with the other. It's important to have the government involved because what you have to do now in China is you have to establish a roadmap, a master plan, to build out a third industrial revolution technology platform across every region of China. That means the government has to be engaged in setting the codes, the regulations, the standards, the incentives, the interoperability. So the government has to play a major role, and then the government and industry have to finance the infrastructure. So there are countries like mine where we don't have a social market model. It's all market. And the marketplace thinks about only short-term interest of the companies, but not the long-term interest of developing the infrastructure so that companies can actually increase their productivity. So it's too short-sighted. Europe and China are social market economy spheres, so that's your second asset. That's a big asset. The third asset's kind of more interesting. You have the cultural DNA. The cultural DNA. What do I mean by that? In the West, our Abrahamic religions, I'm Jewish, Abrahamic religions always said that human beings are the masters of nature. We are in charge, we are separate from nature, we control nature, we're the masters of nature. Confucius did not agree with that. Confucius said human beings are not apart from nature, we are part of nature. And when they asked Confucius, what is the mission of each human being, he said, to extend empathy and to harmonize with nature.
Why do you think it's an advantage for the third industrial revolution?
Why do I say this? The big elephant in the room is climate change. This is now threatening our ability to survive on this earth. We have now had two industrial revolutions with fossil fuels, the 19th and 20th century, first and second industrial revolution. We now have massive amounts of CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide in the atmosphere, blocking the sun's heat from getting off the earth. This is a crisis of our species. This is not just an interesting issue. Our scientists now tell us that we are threatened with our own survival by the end of this century. And our scientists say, and you're a parent, you need to listen to this for parents, that by the end of this century, 70% of all forms of life on this earth could be gone, and our own species in peril. So what does this have to do with a zero marginal cost society and a third industrial revolution? In the last Communist Party Congress, an amendment was added to the Chinese Communist Party Constitution that everyone in the West ignored, but it was a game changer. This amendment of the Communist Party Constitution says that all future development in China, economic development, must adhere to scientific principles and must harmonize. The economic development must be in harmony with nature and the planet. This is revolutionary. And so China's leadership now says we want to create not only a more just economy, but a more ecological civilization.
In your new book, you talk about the zero marginal cost society. Can you explain what the character of a zero marginal cost society is?
None of us ever expected a technology revolution so extreme in its productivity that it could reduce marginal cost to near zero. When that happens, you make goods and services nearly free. Now, you already see this on the internet. It started with Napster, the file sharing and music service in the year 2000. But as I say, we now have hundreds of millions of young people in China and America and Europe who are producing and sharing their own music, their own news blogs, their own knowledge. They're sharing their own videos. All of this at near zero marginal cost, and they're sharing all of this on the sharing economy in the commons. So we have hundreds of millions of young people who are prosumers. They're all entrepreneurs. They're all producing and sharing all sorts of entertainment, news, and knowledge on the communication internet, on a sharing economy on the commons. Whole industries have been devastated. The recording industry has shrunk. Newspapers and magazines have gone out of business. Book publishing has shrunk. Television has shrunk because they can't compete with hundreds of millions of young people who can actually produce and share entertainment, news, and knowledge at near zero marginal cost. Because the whole point of the invisible hand of the market is to reduce marginal cost. Now, the ultimate triumph is to reduce those costs to near zero. But the irony is that gives birth now to a new economic system, the sharing economy and the commons. So the parent capitalism, by its very success, is creating technologies that lead to near zero marginal cost and giving rise to a progeny, the sharing economy and the commons. So now the parent capitalism has to learn to live with its new child, the sharing economy, as it grows up. And we're starting to see two economies working with each other. It's a hybrid economy, part exchange economy in the capitalist market, part sharing economy on the collaborative commons. Here's where it's really interesting, 3D printing. And young people are using garbage for their filament, recycled paper, recycled plastic, recycled newspapers. And they melt it down, and then the free software instructs the product inside the printer to build up, and it pops out with movable parts. Now, some of the fabrication labs for 3D printing in Europe, the young people are using their own renewable energy from solar panels to power their little printer, near zero marginal cost. Then some of the fabrication labs are using electric vehicles powered by near zero marginal cost renewable energy to take their 3D printed products to the market for exchange or to the commons to share for free. And in 10 years from now, those electric and fuel cell vehicles will be printed. They'll be printed locally at very small marginal cost. The first 3D printed car was announced 3 weeks ago. It's all over the internet. It's called the Strati. You may have done a show on it. It's called the Strati. It's an Italian car, and it's all printed. Most all of it is printed, and it's very low cost. And within 10 years, the vehicles that take those 3D printed products to the market of the commons, they're going to be driverless, near zero marginal cost labor. So we're beginning to see the democratization of economic life, where hundreds of millions and billions of people can become their own entrepreneurs, their own prosumers, produce and share news, music, entertainment, energy, 3D printed products at near zero marginal cost on a sharing economy. Now, the big thing in Europe and America is they're now sharing their cars. That's just starting in China. In other words, the young people don't want to own a car. That's grandma and grandpa. Young people want access to mobility. They don't want ownership of a vehicle. So we have millions of young people in the last few years. They're using their apps, their mobile smartphones, connecting up to a website for a car share. Some other person that has a car uses GPS guidance. 3 minutes, they connect. That's what they do. So we have a whole generation that's moving from ownership to access and from markets to sharing on the commons. For every car shared, 15 cars are eliminated from production. Now think of this. Larry Burns used to be the executive vice president of General Motors until 4 years ago. He just did a study, and he took a middle-sized city, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he said we can eliminate 80% of the vehicles right now and have the same mobility cheaper by car sharing. Now think of this study. There's 1 billion cars, buses, and trucks in the world. In dense urban areas, we won't need 800 million of those vehicles, 80% of them. The other 200 million can be shared, and they're going to be electric and fuel cell, and they're going to run on near zero marginal cost energy, and they're going to be 3D printed at cheap marginal cost, and they're going to be driverless in 10 or 15 years. That's a revolution.
Would you say your new book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, is the continuation of the third industrial revolution?
It's the next stage. It's much more involved. The third industrial revolution provided the outline of the story. The zero marginal cost society provides the ecosystem, the technology platform, the frame of reference for a new way of organizing business, economy, and society. So it's much further developed than the third industrial revolution.
What group of people are your target audience in your book?
I wrote the zero marginal cost society for everybody. My target audience is absolutely everybody. Although these are very new ideas, they're easily understandable because they make common sense. So I think for China, for example, where you have a whole young generation that is internet savvy, they're a digital generation. They are totally hip. 5-year-olds know more about the software than I do. So you have a whole generation in China that is already comfortable with a digital world where they're producing and sharing all sorts of information goods at near zero marginal cost. It's just the natural next step for them to read the book, because the book provides a framework. It says what you're doing is really changing history. What you're doing is creating a new economic paradigm. What you're doing is creating a dual system, part capitalist market, part sharing economy that can work together. So I want folks to read the book to understand that what they're doing is very significant. It's a great historical leap forward. And so I'm hoping it'll be read because, one, it provides a framework for moving the economy forward. 2, it allows us to democratize economic life.
In what way do you want your books influence your readers?
I'll tell you a strange story.
Yes.
My book publishers all over the world said, we can't put out a book called The Zero Marginal Cost Society. Who's going to read a book called The Zero Marginal Cost Society? And I said, well, you know what? I think you're wrong.
Why do you insist to name your book as The Zero Marginal Cost Society?
Here's why. I want every school child in China in first grade, I want their teacher to explain to them zero marginal cost. Why? Because it's the only way we can hopefully heal this planet, address climate change, and get to an ecological society, because we are in big trouble as a species. That child should learn in first grade that their whole life should be about finding ways to reduce the cost that they have to maintain a good quality of life. Because zero marginal cost means we minimize the use of the world's resources and its energy. That's why we can produce it for nearly free. And then I want the child to learn that in that zero marginal cost world, what they do produce is shared. Share the cars, share the homes, share the clothes, minimize our use of the Earth's resources. And we have to then produce our own green electricity as well. And let me use the perfect example of what this is, toys. Toys are key. You know, traditionally, a parent will give a 2.5-year-old a toy. And they'll say to their little girl, we bought this toy at the store, we're giving it to you. It's not your brother's toy, it's not your sister's toy, your toy, take care of it. So that child's learning about property in a capitalist market. They're getting ready to be part of it. But now in my country and in Europe, and I think it's just started in China, there are toy websites where thousands of shared toys are up on the website by age group. And a young parent is going up on the website and they're paying a fee, get a credit, and they can download any toy and bring it back to their child. Now, in 10 years from now, those toys will be delivered by drones or driverless electric and fuel cell vehicles printed and near zero marginal cost. So the transport will be almost nothing. But here's what's happening now. The parent is saying to their 2.5-year-old child, this is a toy that another little girl enjoyed. And it brought pleasure to her. She had a smile on her face. And she took very good care of this toy because she knew one day that you would want to play with this toy. So now the child is learning that that the toy is not a possession to defend. It's not a status and power. It's an access to an experience. And the child learns that they have to take care of that toy so that when they're done playing with it, another little child can enjoy the toy. So the children are being prepared to move to a world where they share the economic life on a shared economy in the commons, share their cars, their homes, their energy. This is a philosophical shift in history. It means the property exchange in the market is not disappearing. It's going to be here for a long time. Capitalism is going to flourish. But we also have to realize that a generation is growing up, and according to the Nielsen survey, China is #1 here in wanting a sharing economy. They're growing up partially in the capitalist market, partially in the sharing economy. This is good for everyone to have a dual system where capitalism helps the commons and commons helps capitalism. It's just the next best journey for the human race.
In your new book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, you mentioned another book written by you in 1995, The End of Work. I like this thing of artificial intelligence. It's interesting. Of course, it's also terrible for human beings if it comes true, and this world doesn't need workers anymore. What do you think is the ultimate fate of humans?
Well, I didn't think you were going to ask this question. I'm glad you have. I wrote that book, The End of Work, in 1995, saying that automation, robotics, soon artificial intelligence and analytics are going to eliminate the need for the human race to toil in long hours in the marketplace. Now, when I wrote that book, The Economist, the British economics paper, wrote a cover story saying, Mr. Rifkin, we're not sure this is going to happen because we believe that new productivity disrupts old jobs but creates more new ones. Now, to their credit, many years later, that was 1995, The Economist came back and revisited the subject in 2011 on a cover story, and they said, Mr. Rifkin, you got it right. What's happened is that you didn't need to be clairvoyant. Automation's been moving very quickly over the last 30 years. We've eliminated blue-collar factory worker almost all over the world. The cheapest worker in Asia is not as cheap as the automated, efficient technology replacing them. So factory work is almost disappearing. We have near workerless factories, and within 25 years from now, even textile, it's all going to be totally automated. We know this. But our business community, the economists said, well, train up for white-collar jobs. Well, now the white-collar industries are all automating. Banking, insurance, retail is going virtual, eliminating white-collar workers. So in the long run, we are in a great transformation where hundreds of millions of people are no longer to be needed in mindless toil in the marketplace. So what does this mean? In the short run, and now this is really important to folks listening to this, in the short run, which is the next 40 years, 2 generations, there is one last surge of massive employment that will keep everyone employed for 2 generations. And again, that's the build-out of the 3rd industrial revolution, the Internet of Things platform in every country. That build-out will require millions and millions of workers, semi-skilled, skilled, professional, and conceptual workers. Because as I've just said, to build out the communication internet and converge it with the energy internet and the logistics internet, we have to lay out infrastructure everywhere. That's going to require every industry: logistics, transport, construction, IT, electronics, telephone, cable companies. That's going to put everyone in China to work for 2 generations if we move this way. But in the long run, this Internet of Things platform creates a smart society. We call it smart city, smart planet. So in the long run, as this phases in over 35 years, this Internet of Things is smart. It's intelligent. It feeds back its own and corrects its own errors. That's why it's smart. And so it can run by very small supervisory workforces. We are now connecting every device, every human to the communication, energy, and transport internet. As we digitalize it, it's smart. It thinks for itself. So then what do? What we're seeing now is the beginning of a migration of employment from the capitalist market to the social economy. It's beginning in every country. The social economy is the place where we create social capital. Machines can't do it. Healthcare facilities and hospitals, school systems, environmental arboretums, culture, sports, arts. There's so many things in society that require humans with other humans sharing their lives. And so the social economy in 40 countries studied is the fastest growing economy in the world today. And primarily, most people are employed there and they get fees for services in a healthcare clinic or a daycare center or taking care of the elderly or providing an environmental arboretum or whatever. And so in my country, 10% of the paid employment is now in the social economy. In parts of Europe, the most successful parts, from Germany to Sweden, it's up to 13, 14, 15% of the employment. So this is a good thing, because I think, let me share a story. You know Lord Keynes, the great economist, Lord Keynes. In 1930, in the Depression, Lord Keynes scribbled out a 3-page letter to his grandchildren, 3 little pages. Everyone ignored it. It may be his most prophetic forecast. What he said is, there's a new term here in the Depression called technology displacement. We're now seeing technology replace humans faster than we can find new things for humans to do. He said everyone's frightened that technology is going to take their jobs. But in the long run, this is a good thing. This is going to liberate the human race. Let the machines do the work so that we can engage in creating our social life, creating our transcendence, creating our sense of humanity. So that may be his most poignant forecast, but here's what I think. If we get any of this right, this is a big struggle. In the book, the Zero Marginal Cost Society book, I say this is a big struggle getting there. But let's say that we can move toward this zero marginal cost society. Our grandchildren in 2050 may look back at their grandparents in the 20th century and say, oh, the poor people. My grandpa had to drive a truck all day long, back and forth and back and forth. That was his whole life. My grandma had to sit as a clerk in a store in a cash register taking credit cards all of her life. Because by that time, our children will live in a more automated world. Now, is it a utopia? Of course not. Is there still going to be conflict and problems? That's the way life is on this planet. But it's a better journey. So why should we continue to live in the past when we can move to a better journey in the future?
I was really struck by the vast number of fields you explore in your book. Do you think there's a need for more cross-disciplinary scholarship?
You're the first journalist that's asked me that, too. This is what I'm so glad you asked this. My books are interdisciplinary. No journalist has ever asked me that before. I think the problem in this world is that we create so much specialization that each individual knows more and more about less and less, because their worlds are just little micro worlds, and when that happens, we don't get a bigger picture and a bigger narrative about what the human family and the human journey is about. So we have created these very specialized vocational skills where people only have their own little language, their own little cubicle, their own little part, and they don't see their responsibility, their relationship to the broader community and the journey we're on. So all of my 20 books have been interdisciplinary. I'm so glad you noticed that. Yeah, I like to borrow from philosophy, cultural anthropology, sociology, literature, psychology, the natural sciences, economics, etc. So when I write books on economic transformations, I do so from the frame of reference of the larger world that we live in. I think it's more interesting, but it also allows me, I hope, to create stories that are more realistic, that really tell us where we are and where we're going. So I think that the school systems have to be revamped everywhere. I spend a lot of time on the education part in this new book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society. We need to rethink schools. Schools need to be interdisciplinary. Children need to be able to think systemically and critically. You know, when I was growing up, the traditional school was like a factory. It still is. The teacher was the authority, the students were there, and they simply had to recite, and memorize. And when I was growing up, if students shared their knowledge, shared their thinking with each other, it was called cheating. If you share your knowledge and your thinking with other students, it's called cheating. Well, the point is the human race is the most social creature. Our whole being is to share and to create together. The schools wipe that out. They make every kid an independent unit. They teach the child that knowledge is power, something to possess, and make sure that no one else does so you can be more competitive. That's terrible. That's not what social life's about. So I would like to see schools where the teacher becomes a guide, that there's a frame of authority, but the students are encouraged to be mindful, to cross disciplines, to be creative, to share their knowledge together, and to understand that knowledge is not just a possession to defend because you want to make more money. Knowledge is a way for us to create our humanity, share our lives, create a journey together on this planet.
You just said you have written 20 books. Which book would you say is your favorite?
That's like asking a parent, who's your favorite child? It's the same thing.
Yes.
I really don't want to go there. I would say this new book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, this is a book I've always, in the back of my mind for 40 years, way back somewhere, I think this book was there. And in some ways a culmination of all the books, but it's part of a 3-book series. I actually wrote the last 3 books as part of a series. The first book was The Empathic Civilization, Rethinking Our Narratives of History. That's not being published in China until next year. But that was the first book, 660-page book on rethinking history and the human narrative. The second book was The Third Industrial Revolution, laying out the vision. The third book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, attempts to take the journey to the final stage and say, how do we rethink economic life on this planet, and how do we create a more democratic journey and create a more ecological society? So I'd have to say the Zero Marginal Cost Society. I don't want my other books to hear this. I have to say that I am quite taken with the Zero Marginal Cost Society. I love all the other books, but I love this one.
Can I ask how you arrange your time? How long usually do you need to work in a day?
My workday was much less rigorous 20 years ago. I would work a regular day, and then I'd go swim. I was a swimmer for 25 years, and I'd relax. Now that I'm just about 70, I'm going 70 years old in January, my work days now, I'm doing a 70-hour work week, which is too much. It's really too much. I tried to create a work day where I can have reflective time and thinking time. Too much of our life today is surrounded by information coming to us, too much stimuli. So we're constantly looking at our smartphone, we're constantly looking at the screen, we're constantly fleeing from one bit of information to another. I do it as well. But that means we have less time for introspection, reflection, mindfulness, which are the most essential parts of our life and our being. So I'm trying to find, and I'm not any better than this anyone else, I'm trying to find ways of having parts of my day reflective and quiet, and parts of my day quite active and engaged in social interaction.
I know your work has been seen as controversial. Opponents have attacked the lack of scientific rigor in your claims, as well as some of the tactics you use to promote your views. I was wondering how you feel about this.
I only saw one review in history that said that, and it keeps coming up on the websites. It was a review done by a biologist in 1982, who's since passed away. But I believe my books are quite rigorous. They're used by universities all over the world. They're used by companies. They're used by governments. Certainly, that was the only review you've ever seen probably on the internet. That was a guy named Stephen Jay Gould in 1982, because I wrote a book on the biotechnology and life sciences, and he wasn't particularly happy about it. But take the new book, Zero Marginal Cost Society. Controversial, but the major business press have written long, lengthy reviews saying this is a rigorous new book. Financial Times, Fortune, Forbes, Handelsblatt in Germany, all the major publications said, look, this is a serious book that looks into the way we need to change society. So I try to be very rigorous. I try to be very disciplined. My books take a huge amount of my personal research time, and I'm proud to say over these 40 years that with one or two individual exceptions of people being critical, I've had a pretty good ride in terms of people saying, you know what, I may not agree with all of what he's saying, but certainly there's a lot of rigor that goes into this. So, and also, let me say for everybody out there, all of us can do this. The idea that only scientists should be able to talk about science, or only economists should be able to talk about economists, and only political scientists should be able to talk about politics, that puts us all in a place of dependency, that we have to rely on the experts because they know more. Well, actually, I don't really think that's the case. I think a lot of experts get involved in knowing less and less and more about minutia, and they lose the big picture. So I would encourage everyone to do what I do. You know, as my wife knows, you know, I was an average student in school. I just worked hard. I was mindful. Anyone can do what I can do. And what I want to do is empower everyone to believe you don't have to wait for the experts. You don't have to wait for the authority. And this is why I love the internet. Why I love the internet, and now the Internet of Things, is young people are saying, yeah, we can, our talent counts. Each of us is now to be recognized in some way because we're contributing. Even if you just contribute a news blog or a comment on someone else's blog, you're now a participant. You're now using your full creativity. Even if you put a photograph up for people to look at, or put out your own video, or share your own renewable energy, or create a 3D printed product. This is the democratization of human life. This allows a younger generation growing up in a digital world, an Internet of Things world, to flourish. Each individual can flourish to the full extent of their one and only life on this planet, and not have to be taken down or minimized or marginalized and have to be passive recipients of the word of authority by some experts. We all need to be responsible for using our mind to the full extent we can. We all need to be responsible to each other to share our gifts, and especially our creativity. And this is the kind of society I think that China's heading toward. And that is a society where we're not only entrepreneurial, but we are socially committed to each other and responsible for each other's lives.